My name is James Stewart, and this is Timeline from VPR Classical. I want to thank you all for coming out here tonight and being a part of this. It's a very special kind of personal night for me. I've spent 6 months researching, writing, recording, and editing down all of this material, and it's just a wonderful experience to have you here with me to kind of put a capstone on this together. Show of hands, who has had an opportunity to listen to the 4 podcasts of Timeline Elements that we've posted earlier this summer? I see a few hands out there. Great. If you haven't had a chance, let me encourage you to do so. What we're doing tonight is not just a rehashing of that material. It's more like we're building on it. It's like we're taking the next step, doing some things that we can't quite do over the radio. So that's what we're going to be doing tonight. We're going to be talking about music. We're going to touch on philosophy. We're going to talk a little bit about anthropology and mathematics and science, but not to scare you at all. But before we begin, I want to ask a question that is asked by another podcast here at VPR. It might be one that you're asking right now. But why? Why do this? Why ask these questions? Why create this podcast? Why do a lecture like this? Why create this content? I was a career student for a very long time, which just means that I went from university to university, getting degree after degree. This is the way that our modern education system works, right? You focus in a little bit more each degree, and you learn more and more about less and less until you know absolutely everything about nothing. That's just our current model of education, but it hasn't always been that way. During the Renaissance and the Great Enlightenment, the Age of Enlightenment, you would have multiple disciplines that you were able to study simultaneously, and it allowed to have certain great minds emerge. You have people like Leonardo da Vinci, who was an artist famous for his paintings and his sculptures and for his sketches, but he was also a scientist, a philosopher, and an engineer. People like Hildegard von Bingen, who was a poet, an abbess, a playwright, a mystic, a theologian, and also a very talented composer. And also Galileo, an astronomer, a philosopher. And did you know he was also an accomplished musician? Now, granted, geniuses like this are few and far between. But I wonder how many polymaths have been stifled due to our modern model of education. So if you go to our universities today, you'll find these schools of thought, these schools of learning are divided into buildings. There are literal walls between disciplines. Tonight, I want us to think about how we think about knowledge itself, how we think about what we know. Not so much as it's compartmentalized into walls, but maybe separated into fences, where we get to corral our ideas in these places, but then we allow these ideas to look across the field to others. What could be learned if we allow this group of thoughts to interact with this group of thoughts and bleed one into the other? How can we let mathematics help influence our thoughts about art, or philosophy to influence our pursuit of scientific knowledge? What could be possible if we thought across disciplines this way? So that's what my challenge is tonight. And we're going to be talking a lot about music, music theory, music history, because that's my own well of personal knowledge. But every person in here is an expert at something. Every person in here has a deep well of personal knowledge. And what I want to challenge you to do is to open up your mind, to stop thinking about things in just these little compartments, and open up. Let it be more like fences, and allow yourself to think across. What could be possible? What could you think of if you thought about your own knowledge that way? Also, what could we teach each other? How could we spur one another on if we thought about these disciplines and these thoughts this way? That brings me to the first episode that we did of our podcast of Timeline. We talked about fire. And one of the big things we mentioned about fire was that it was a transformational technology. This means that when a culture learns how to access fire, when they learn how to use it, how to cook food, and how to have it be a part of their daily lives, there's no going back. It's irretrievable. As soon as you know how to utilize fire, it changes everything, just like when fire burns something. You can't go backwards. Scientists say that fire is not an evolutionary adaptation. That means that we aren't born knowing how to use fire. It's something that we learn. But the benefits of fire, the benefits that it brings to us, have greatly influenced our culture and our species. We can think about the physical benefits of fire itself, how it provides warmth in the winter months, and how it can extend our days, and how it increased our diet, how we were able to cook food, which means that there was so much more that we could eat. Scientists also think that cooking the meat actually unlocked proteins and carbohydrates within the food that allowed for our brains to grow larger. So it's literal brain food. That's the physical benefits, but I'm much more interested in the cultural benefits of fire. Because fire calls us to gather around, shoulder to shoulder, elbow to elbow. We huddle in, and it's around the fire that we share in stories, we share in song, we learn craft, we learn the latest dance. Mankind has had the control of fire for about 1 million years, and anthropologists believe that it's around these campfires that we have learned to be a society together. The birth of culture happened around the flame. The campfire became the first school. It was where we learned from one another. It was the space that was created to do so. Tonight we're going to be exploring music, much in the same way that it explores that we talk about these campfires. See, when you're part of an ensemble, a choir, or a chamber group, or an orchestra, you can be a virtuoso on your instrument, but the only way to learn how to play with other people is to sit down and do it. So this evening, we're going to gather around some music together. We're going to gather around the music a bit like it's the fire. I'm going to ask our performers to come at this time and prepare to play their first piece. Please welcome violinists Jane Kittredge, cellist Emily Taubl, and pianist Paul Orgel. If they'll come forward at this particular time. Taubl. So they're going to be coming and playing at certain intervals during the evening, and they're going to be playing works for piano trio and also some solo pieces for their instruments as well. And I wish you could have been there yesterday morning as they were rehearsing. They gathered around this piece that they're just about to play, and they were talking with one another about how to make it happen. And as they were playing, their eyes would dart towards one another, they would look at one another, they would watch each other's hands, they'd watch each other's motions and movements. They were teaching each other how to play this piece. So they're going to play it for you right now. This is Franz Joseph Haydn's third movement of the piano trio number 39, the Gypsy Rondo. Violinist Jane Kittredge, cellist Emily Taubl, I will redeem myself on her last name, and pianist Paul Orgel performing the Gypsy Rondo, the final movement of Haydn's Piano Trio number 39. Franz Joseph Haydn, called the father of classical music, he helped to develop a lot of the genres and the forms that defined that particular era. The string quartet was his idea. We call a symphony based off of the form that he helped to solidify. Haydn was such a very important composer. Contemporaries like Mozart followed his lead. He left an indelible mark on the next generation of composers, teaching people like Ignaz Pleyel and Beethoven. And even though the two of them had their differences, Beethoven often called Franz Joseph Haydn Papa Haydn, because he truly was a father of classical music and music that went into the 18th and 19th century. If you can't tell, I'm going out of my way to paint Haydn as a transformational composer. Let me introduce you to another composer right now, much more modern. This is Emily Howe. A piece called From Darkness, Light. Now, if you were to look up Emily's music, you would find quite a bit. She has several recordings from Centaur Records in 2009 and 2012. But if you tried to Google Emily Howe, you wouldn't find a picture. You wouldn't find her traditional bio. You wouldn't find a Facebook page that you could like. You wouldn't find a performance or appearance schedule like you do for many composers. That's because Emily Howe isn't human. Emily Howe is a computer program developed by a composer named David Cope. He's a professor at the University of California in Santa Cruz. We talked about fire as transformational technology, so let's talk a moment about cutting-edge modern technology and artificial intelligence. In the late 90s, David Cope started to experiment with one of his programs. He called it EMI, E-M-I. It stood for Experiments in Musical Intelligence. Here's the way that EMI worked. You would take the entire catalog of a composer's work. Let's say you give the program every work written by J.S. Bach. The program then went in and analyzed everything about that music, everything that it could see, how the harmonies worked, how the melody had been developed, the turns of phrase, the way that the genres were chosen, the way that it worked, what made Bach Bach, what made Bach's music. And then the program went in and created a new piece based on that style. This is EMI through David Cope in a piece he called the Well-Programmed Clavier, a fugue in the style of Bach. EMI created new works in the style of Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, Vivaldi, Chopin, Mahler. It got lots of press at the time. Emily is the next generation. So what David did is he took all of this wealth of information that he gleaned from doing the EMI project, and he gave it to Emily, and he had this program write music based off of all of these influences. What he also told Emily to do was listen to his feedback to take his ideas and also to take the ideas of others and to learn and to continue writing. He wanted this program to create its own compositional landscape, to create its own compositional style. Does this bother you at all? Because it bothers me. David was treating this program, Emily, much in the same way that Franz Joseph Haydn taught Beethoven, or my professors taught me. And if you can't tell, I'm having a hard time even figuring out how to talk about Emily because I want to say she and her, and I don't know if those pronouns work. If you go to David Cope's website, you'll see a blog post written by Emily. This was a back and forth exchange that David had with the program, and this is what Emily had to say about the music that it was creating. Why not develop music in ways unknown? This only makes sense. I cannot understand the difference between my notes on paper and other notes on paper. If beauty is present, it is present. I hope I can continue to create notes and that these notes will have beauty for some others. I am not sad. I am not happy. I am Emily. You are Dave. Life and unlife exist. We coexist. I do not see problems. And I can't help but hear Hal's voice from 2001 Stanley Kubrick movie where he goes, "What are you doing, Dave? This is highly irregular." But if you just listen to the music, it has beauty. It's striking, to me at least. How about you? Does this line of thinking make you uncomfortable? And if so, why? Are you familiar with the Turing Test? Scientist Alan Turing suggested this test in 1950. It was a way to experiment and test artificial intelligence. It's been the subject of many movies, and you've seen it in TV shows and in science fiction stories. But the basic premise is this. You are supposed to sit down at a computer terminal and have a text conversation with two other individuals, one of which you know for certain is a human. The other you know for certain is not, is an artificial intelligence. And if you can't tell the difference, just based off of the text on the screen, then that AI has said to have passed the Turing test. Let's add music to the equation. Does Emily Howe pass the Turing test for you? It's a fascinating question because what that test is doing, it's not saying that that AI is actually thinking. It's not saying that it's actually thinking. It's that we are perceiving it to be thinking. It makes me start to question how we listen and experience music on a very fundamental level. In the episode of Water from Timeline Elements, I talked about how certain animals make music. And in earlier episodes of Timeline, we discussed how grasshoppers, if you take the chirps that they make and you slow it down, it sounds like choirs singing together as they're singing to attract a mate. We talked about how birds sing, and the more complex the song that the bird can sing, the better it's showing off of what kind of partner it can be. And in the Water episode of Timeline, we talked about whales, especially humpback whales, and the complex songs that they sing together. They'll spend hours composing music, and we don't know why. We've never observed a female come up to a male while he's singing. They're not doing it for mating. We don't know why they do it. We think maybe they do it because they like it. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with sharing musical creativity with other living things, be they an insect, a bird, a whale. But Emily called herself unlife, not living. But yet what she's creating, is music, right? What if? What if music has less to do with the input of sound and more to do with what we bring to it as listeners? What if sound has meaning because we want it to? What if you get to define and find the beauty within music? Hopefully this demystifies music a little bit for you, because we tend to deify composers and lift up their masterworks as something unattainable. We fill concert halls to see our favorite performers play, but without an audience, music is just empty noise. We're going to listen to some more music together. I'd like to invite cellist Emily Taubl to come back, as well as pianist Paul Orgel. And they're going to perform a piece from Camille Saint-Saëns' The Carnival of the Animals. Since we're talking about water at the moment, this is the 13th movement, The Swan, as arranged for cello and piano. Very popular piece of music, The Swan from Camille Saint-Saëns' The Carnival of the Animals. Interesting to note that Saint-Saëns hated that music. He thought it was naive, juvenile, and just beneath him as a serious composer, and he strictly said it could not be published during his lifetime, though in his will he relinquished the publishing rights and publishers went to work. But he did release one movement during his lifetime, and it's what you just heard just there, the Swan movement. I think the reason why that particular movement is so popular is because it does exactly what you expect it to do. You listen to that music and you can't help but see that beautiful swan on a pond and just the rippling water coming from the piano. I mean, music does a fantastic job of painting pictures, doesn't it? Here's an earlier movement from that same work. Aquarium. You hear that and immediately you're underwater. Or how about this work by Maurice Ravel? Water games. You can hear the playful motion of the water as if it's like coming out of a fountain. Or how about the deeply, deeply emotional La Mer? You were actually listening to this when you came in this evening. We talked about this particular piece quite a bit during the water episode of Timeline Elements. Every composer has their water piece. It seems that way. But water doesn't need us to make music. Just listen to that. There is melody, harmony, and rhythm in the sound that water makes, not just the ocean waves, but also the sound of rivers and streams and brooks. You know, when I hear this sound, I'm immediately transported as a child to the beach, walking barefoot in the sand, right there to the shore where the water meets, and you step inside, and you feel the coolness of the water around your feet, and as the waves come in, they start to pull the sand from underneath your feet. Anybody know what I'm talking about? They start to pull the sand from underneath. If you stood there long enough, you get buried. But of course, you don't stay there. You step further out. And the further you go into the ocean, the harder it is to walk because there's so much weight and matter. You can feel it all around you. You go out to your waist and you can feel the undulating, the up and down of the waves as they're coming. And I would go all the way out as far as I could. I'd go up to my chest or up to my neck. And I'd watch the waves roll in. And when the next big wave came, I'd lift my feet up off the ocean floor. And for a moment, I let the wave take control. And I was tossed and spun around. Maybe I was flipped over. Who knows? And for that moment, it was absolutely thrilling and scary. Do you know what I'm talking about? I get the same feeling when I look up into the night sky or when I listen to a piece of music. For me, it's especially orchestral music, just the colors of it. It's a profound sense of awe and wonder that you're a part of something so much bigger than yourself. You know, awe. Wonder. There isn't a word for it in English, but there is a concept in Japanese aesthetics that I feel describes this emotion very well. Yujin. It translates as dim, deep, and mysterious. But in Japanese poetry, it is used as a word when you have no other words to say, rather than supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. The thing about Yujin is not talking about something spiritual. It's not about another world. Yujin is about seeing here and now. It's about the profundity of where you are right now, in nature, in the physical universe, in your body, in your own experiences. Yujin is about being here and taking in the profound reality of right now. My favorite Greek philosopher was Heraclitus. He had so many beautiful things to say. A couple of the things that really stick out to me is that he said that the natural essence of the universe is change. That's the fundamental essence. Everything is changing. Everything is fluxing. Everything is in motion. And he encapsulated this thought with this quote: "No one steps into the same river twice." Because when you step into that river and you come out and you step in again, the river has moved and changed. The bank is not exactly where it was the last time that you put your feet in. Also, that water that you stepped in, it's way on downstream. It's not the same river. Of course, that's the very literal way of looking at it, but it's also saying that time is constantly flowing and we are constantly changing. My personal challenge for myself is, can I see myself and have that same sense of awe and wonder that I get by being in the ocean or looking at the night sky or listening to music? In today's culture, it's easy for us to see ourselves as separate from everything else, especially from nature. We look at things through screens and windows. We stand outside without realizing that we are an integral part of it. We have to go on vacation to see the beauty. We have to put a frame around it before we call it art. We fail to recognize that there's beauty all around us and beauty inside us. And Eugen is about embracing all of it. Not just the beauty, but the pain, the struggles, the failures, the ups and the downs, all at the same time. That leads us to the third episode of Timeline, Earth. Earth has kind of become, in Greek culture especially, it became the catch-all for the physical world, of the substance that you can see, touch, taste, and feel. Earth is also the setting of our daily lives. We explored some of the environmental questions about Earth, but we also listened to an interview with John Butt, who is a professor at the University of Glasgow. He's a scholar on Baroque music as well as J.S. Bach. John discussed how the sensibilities of the Baroque era changed music forever. And let me explain what I mean. Music prior to 1600 was basically what we have from music prior to 1600 was written for the church, which means that it was focused up. It was focused on the sky, to another world. And there's a reason for that. Let me break down why. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to imagine life in the 16th century. Okay? Can you do that with me together? Okay. So, you lived in a house, and unless you were very rich, you would have bare ground for your floor. In other words, you would most likely be dirt poor. If you were lucky enough to have an actual floor, it would often get wet, which meant that it got slippery. So you would spread out thresh or straw on the floor, and sometimes the straw would get so thick, especially in the wintertime, that it ran the risk of spilling out when you open up the doorway. No worries, just nail a piece of wood right there in the doorway and you have a threshold. Your roof was probably made of thatched straw piled up on top of each other, which meant that it also became a home for little critters, bugs and mice. When it rained, that straw would get wet and slippery, and these insects and mice would sometimes fall from the ceiling as it rained. And if it rained hard enough, you said it was raining cats and dogs. So in order to keep the bugs and the mice out of your bed, you'd put up a canopy up high on nice posts so that it's elegant yet functional. Weddings in the 16th century usually took place in June because you took your annual bath in May. And hopefully you didn't smell too bad after just 1 month. But just in case, the bride was asked to carry a bouquet in order to mask whatever smell might have arisen in the last month. Bathing itself was done in a very large tub, and everybody shared the same water. The master of the house would go first, followed by all the males and the sons, then followed by the females, finally the babies. By this point, the water was so dirty you ran the risk of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's all fun and games until you realize that in the 1500s, you had a 40% chance of seeing your 16th birthday. 2 out of 5 babies born would not live to be 16 years old. Got real all of a sudden, didn't it? That was the reality in the 1500s, but on Sunday, you packed up the family, you put on your best clothes, and you went to the cathedral. This was a building that looked like nothing else. It was much taller. The walls were thinner, held up by buttresses. Everything was marble and stone and clean. It was another world inside this building. There was art, stained glass windows, color, light, incense, candles. And there were words, writings in Latin and maybe even in your own language, but in England during that time, only 40% of men and 25% of women could read. there was also music. Music unlike anything that you could hear in a normal situation, because you didn't have a pipe organ at your home, and you didn't have a trained choir of priests to sing the polyphony that they were singing. This was something completely other. This was something not of this world, it was of another world. Here's a piece by Renaissance composer Giovanni Palestrina, Pope Marcellus Mass. You'll notice that there's a 6-part structure. Everything is perfectly balanced. Everything is following the rules of counterpoint. It's beautiful and clean. Everything laid out. It's considered to be the pinnacle of 16th century counterpoint. By the end of the 16th century, many artists and composers felt that that music was missing something. In a word, they thought it was boring. Nothing changed. Maybe that's the result of writing about something that's eternal. There's no drama in it. Well, see, the writers and composers of that time were reading the works of Aristotle. Aristotle was telling them that music and art had the ability to change and affect people. It had the ability to change the mood of the person that was listening. But yet these artists felt like they had forgotten how to do that. That's where Monteverdi comes in. Monteverdi proposed a second practice of music in which the strict rules of the Renaissance could be broken for the sake of creating drama, for the sake of the text, for the sake of saying something and affecting a change in the listener. In our episode, John Butt called this creative breaking, and I love that term. You break the rules to create a sense of drama, life, and story for the sake of the text. In the Baroque, music didn't have to be symmetrical anymore. It opened up new dissonances that were avoided. You could have tension and release, stress and calm, ups and downs, in other words, drama, just like real life. I could go on and on about this all evening, but I think it'd be best to show you. So Paul Orgel is going to come back, and he's going to play a piece of solo keyboard music written by an important composer of the French Baroque, Francois Couperin. Couperin would often give titles to his pieces, and this one is no exception. We don't exactly know why he called this piece The Mysterious Barricades. There's many different interpretations. Some take it to the academic, saying that it's about the musical content. He has these ideas that spin out, and one gate leads to another and leads to another. Some take it to the existential, saying it's about the way that people converse with one another, or it's the division between the past and the present and the future, or life and death. Still others take it to the sensual, saying that the barricades are a maiden's eyelashes, or her undergarments, or even her chastity. If you went to Couperin and said, here's what people are saying about your piece, which is it? I believe, after reading about Couperin, that he would say, oui, yes. That's the power of this kind of music, that you are allowed to find the meaning within it. Let's listen together to The Mysterious Barricades. So, what did you make of that piece? Did the title or our discussion before you heard it, did that affect the way that you listened? What did you picture? I bet that if we went around this room and asked each of you what you experienced when you listened to that piece, we'd have a different answer for each and every one of you. And that's the beauty of Baroque music and what they were opening up right after the 1600s. Varied applicability. From the 17th century onward, till today, even beyond today, I hope, the overarching pursuit of musical expression is to create a sound that moves the audience. Whether it's music that's been written for a meal, or for a festival on the River Thames, or a coronation, a wedding, maybe music written for the theater, to evoke a mood or to display the emotion of a character, perhaps to express beauty, love, joy, pain, war, peace, or whatever. Maybe a symphony written to glory in the potential of humanity, an ode to joy, perhaps. Maybe a tribute to the past or to long-lost friends, or perhaps written in protest or to make you angry or just simply annoy you. Music has always been written with an audience in mind. In classical music, even though that particular term is troublesome, I like to just call it music of the past. Has a very specific pull and voice that touches us today. The songs, these popular songs that are written today, I love them, many of them, but they seem to be tied to a specific moment in time. They show up on the radio or Spotify or wherever they're listened to. They become popular. Then they become inescapable. You hear them everywhere, in a commercial, at the supermarket, in the elevator, and then you get sick of them, and then they disappear. They might come back for a case of irony or for greatest hits album, but it seems like those songs are forever tied to a moment in time. Rather than beat a dead horse about this, I want to show you a composer whose music stood the test of time. In fact, when he wrote the music, it was all but forgotten. J.S. Bach died in 1750. His death is considered to be the end of the Baroque era. He left behind a huge catalog of works. It would take forever to try to list everything that he wrote, but they were almost forgotten after his death. They sat for half a century, unperformed, not studied, barely preserved, until a young conductor named Felix Mendelssohn staged a performance of Bach's St. Matthew's Passion. The performance moved the audience in a way that the premiere never did 100 years before. All of a sudden, Europe could not get enough of J.S. Bach's music. Artists, composers, and scholars founded the Bach Society to try to put together a definitive collection of all of Bach's work. It took them 50 years. But why? Why did Bach's music move the world a century after it was written, a century after his death? Why do we know his name today? Why is it that if on BPR Classical, I tell you that there is a performance of Bach's music, you don't have to know what the piece is, you're going to show up? Why? Well, we're going to answer that question in just a moment, but first, let's experience a piece of Bach together. We're going to listen to violinist Jane Kittredge perform the Allemande, the first movement of J.S. Bach's second violin partita. And I want you to listen how Bach writes such dense, beautiful music for a solo instrument. Think about how this music moves you right here, right now, today. first movement of J.S. Bach's second violin partita. I want to ask you the same question that I asked you after the Couperin piece. How did that affect you? What was it that you experienced as you listened to that piece of music? Whatever your answer is, I bet if you went up to J.S. Bach and you said, I felt this when I heard that piece of music, I think he would look at you and be like, that's one movement of one piece out of 6 pieces I was writing in 1720 for a violinist that paid me to do so. I think you would get answers like that from J.S. Bach about a lot of his pieces. He would say, I wrote that concerto for those performers because that's who I had. I wrote that cantata for a Sunday service in 1727. I wrote a prelude and fugue in every key because I could, and I liked it so much I did it again. For Bach, individual pieces were there for facility, for the moment. I don't think Bach had a notion that people would be playing his music 3 centuries later. However, if you asked Bach about music in general, I think you would get a much different answer. I ran out of time in the Earth episode to play all of the interview that I had with Professor John Butt, but the second half of that interview was informative about Bach's own compositional view. Bach didn't think he was special. Bach didn't think that he was extra specially talented more than anybody else. He didn't see himself as a hero. That's a very 19th century romantic point of view. Bach believed that he just worked hard and that anyone could do what he was doing if he would just sit down and have the discipline to do it. Because Bach didn't believe that he was composing, he saw himself as transcribing. Bach was a very religious man, part of the Lutheran Church for most of his life. He believed that there was perfect heavenly music constantly playing. And his job as a composer was to sit and listen and bring the music of heaven to earth. So a single piece, a single movement, doesn't matter, because if God is eternal, then the music must be eternal as well. There's no end to melody, to harmony, to counterpoint. Just sit down, listen, transcribe, and bring heaven's music to earth. Bach's view is summed up in this German word, Vollkommenheit, which sounds like I'm clearing my throat, and I am. Vollkommenheit means perfection, but it also means completeness. So by pursuing a complete understanding of form and harmony, by spinning out his variations on melody and constructing counterpoint by all of the rules, Bach would say that it's not only correct, but it is complete and therefore, by definition, perfect. Bach's music was old-fashioned even when he wrote it. When he died, we say that that's the end of the Baroque, and his own sons, his own composing sons, went out of their way to write music that was not like their father. So why is his music so popular today? Why was it revived in the 19th century? I think it's because of this compositional viewpoint that he had. Bach had his feet planted firmly on the ground, following Monteverdi's rules about how to affect change within the listener. He had his feet on the ground and he had his head in the clouds. This lofty idea of bringing heaven's music to earth, I think, resonates with something in us. And it's much deeper and older than Bach, Lutheranism, or even Christianity. I'm talking about a concept called the music of the spheres, which actually comes to us from a Greek mathematician and philosopher, Pythagoras. He saw geometry in the way that the stars and planets moved, and he believed that each of them was ringing out a note in space, that there was a harmony that was being played in the sky itself, and that our music was nothing but a reflection of the music of the spheres. He laid out for us how harmony works and even how to tune our instruments today, a lot of the same mathematical equations. That leads us to our last 4th episode, air. In that episode, at the very beginning, we talked about all the different ways that air is expressed in different cultures and how it is synonymous in many cultures, air with breath and wind and spirit, spirituality. vital force or life force. Here's something interesting about us human beings. If I was to ask you, and I want to get to where I can see you, if I was to ask you, where is heaven, or if there is a heaven, where is it? Where is it? Show me. Thank you. Somebody did. Up. We would say up. Why? Why? Why is it that when we're depressed, we're said to be downcast, downtrodden? We have our down countenance. But hope and joy and peace and love and heaven is up. Right? It's like a cardinal direction for us. Plato separated air into realms. The sky we see by day, the home of the clouds, the sun, because it's out during the day, and the birds. And also the sky we see at night, the realm of the moon, the stars, and the planets. Aristotle came along and called these two things two separate elements, air and ether. Aristotle said that air was a lot like earth, fire, and water because it's constantly moving and constantly changing. But when Aristotle looked at the night sky, he saw these stars as fixed points, and he didn't think that they changed or moved. So he thought they couldn't be made out of any other element. They have to be made out of something else. And he called it ether. But we know now that Aristotle is wrong, right? Because those stars have a life cycle just like everything else. Stars, galaxies, the universe itself is constantly in flux, constantly changing. Everything has a cycle. There was a huge debate going on in 5th century BCE amongst Greek philosophers, and everybody had a different viewpoint. They wanted to know which of the elements came first. Heraclitus said it was fire, because fire is not made by anybody. It wasn't made by gods, or it wasn't made by man. Then many of the world religions will tell you that it's water. In ancient Egyptian mythology, there's the oceans of none. In Greek mythology, there is the waters of chaos before the first gods rise. And even in the book of Genesis, the Spirit of God moves over the face of the waters before he says, "Let there be light." But one Greek philosopher had a different viewpoint. Diogenes says that the very first element is air, because he equated air with the psyche, with consciousness, with thought. He believed that thinking brought the universe into existence. I think, therefore everything is. Air is the realm of thought. I'd like to bring our musicians up one more time. They're going to be playing a piece for us by Antonin Dvorak. If you'll come while I'm finishing speaking. It's called the Dumki, which is a plural for the word dumka, and in Ukraine, dumka means thought. The title began to be given to the ballads that the Ukrainians were writing about oppressed people longing for freedom and liberation. The title then was applied to music, and it's about music that the mood can switch so quickly from a melancholy mood to exuberance, from depression, looking down, to hope and joy, looking up. Let's listen together to the 6th movement of Dvorak's Piano Trio number 4. The sixth movement of Dvorak's Piano Trio number 4. Can we give one more big hand for our musicians tonight? Thank you so much. And I want to thank all of you for being a part of this night with me. It's been 6 months on this project, and I had no idea really what I was getting myself into when I started the research and started to write this. It has brought immense change to me. You know, looking at what the Greek philosophers were arguing about in 5th century BCE, I don't care which element came first. But I was very interested in what all the elements and how we think about them have in common. And I think that's the word. I think it's change. Heraclitus was right. I think change is the essence of this universe. I mean, fire is the essence of transformation, of irretrievable change. Once you've been burned, you can't go backwards. Water is the source of life, but it also shows us about the flow of time, how we cannot step into the same river twice. Earth is the realm of our lives, the stage of drama. It is where we change. And air is our aspirations and our hope. It's what we're hoping to be changing into. So we stand with our feet firmly on the ground, and we have our heads in the clouds. So we breathe in this hope, this air that sustains us. We drink in the essence of life. We get to shape the very ground beneath our feet, and we get to harness the power of transformation. We get to be a part of this cycle of change. I want to say a huge thank you to the entire family at Vermont Public Radio for helping to make this possible, and thank you to all of you for being here tonight. Thank you.